Welcome to Making Sense of Ourselves, a podcast about the hard work it takes to get to know yourself. My name is Abby Covert, and with me in this episode is my co-host, Alfi. On today's episode, we are diving into the second half of the program that Alfi and I have been working on together for the last 2 years, and is finally available for all to learn from at the Sensemakers Club. Alfi and I recorded this special 2-part episode over the last few weeks as we decided to circle back and use the tools that we designed on ourselves. In this second part, I am on the hot seat, talking about visualizing my life as a timeline, asking for external perspectives, and reestablishing my aspirations through creation of a set of balancing continuums, which we talked about back in episode 4. If you're interested in the program, visit thesensemakersclub.com and look for Making Sense of Ourselves in our course catalog. So, to get us started, Alfi, I'm going to start in the timeline direction. So I want to talk about this real quick because I would say this was very surprising to me. When we taught this course for the very first time, we had everyone make a timeline of their life ahead of the course. And when they got to the very first day, we put them in breakout rooms with a stranger and we said, use your timeline to tell your life story to a stranger. And we were shocked by how many people came back after that breakout saying that they were in tears because it was just such a different experience to be prepared to answer that question as opposed to kind of like, ah. So yeah, before I get into my response, any thoughts on the timeline? I know you really reflected on exercising well.
Yeah, I think this was an interesting one. In our first round at teaching us, we had a couple of people who'd done a timeline recently, and then we had people who it was like the very first time considering even doing that. And one of the things that really stuck out to me was, I think it says a lot about you about how you actually break your life up. Like, is it by where you're from? Is it by, the people that you knew? Was like where you were living? Were there like this sort of different categories, like school, the different levels of schooling, education, and work that you were kind of going through? So I think that says a lot about how we're sort of thinking about this. And I guess the sort of disparate answers we got was extremely interesting to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, people had all sorts of ways that they tackled this particular assignment. When I think about my own, I have the benefit of having changed location a lot of times in my life. And so I kind of have like this clear periods of my life that's defined by location. But there was many folks who we've gone through this exercise with that didn't have a change of location. I think you were actually one of the people that doesn't have much of a change of location.
Exactly. Like I've only really lived in 2 cities my entire life. And so mine was very much by sort of the different periods of my life by what I was doing, from schooling to like where I was working. Although I suspect that has somewhat changed, because in a sense I would almost say since then I've kind of gotten a new perspective about how I split my life up. It's kind of like in half, and I feel like I'm kind of going too too far into things, but I just think it's interesting because it's kind of like before. So I had an illness for a lot of my childhood, and it's kind of like there is a before and after, and that's now how I kind of break my life up. And I think it's a lot more telling, because I almost feel like I was different parts on either side of that line. I was different people on either side of that line.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like that brings up a part of this exercise that I think made people slightly uncomfortable, which was to visualize things that are more traumatic in your past. And the reason that we suggested that people do that is because oftentimes we don't see those things played alongside the other things that are going on in our life. Like, for example, our personal or professional achievements, or where we're living, or who we're living with. Like, sometimes when you put all of those things together, you get a much more clear picture of the patterns and the ways that you got to different places, and maybe even a way to like predict a future outcome that's better. So I found this to be a really effective and powerful exercise. I've been doing my own personal timeline for about a decade now, so mine's more about like updating it. But to your point, I feel like I also change how I think about like the different periods of my life as I get further into my life. Like, I feel like now there's definitely a division forming of like being a parent and not being a parent. And I feel like I'm just still early enough in the parenting journey that I haven't quite made that like break. But I could see, 20 years from now, I could see that being like a very definable chunk of my life, as opposed to the way that I've been organizing it to date. Yeah. Should we look at my timeline? Speaking of,
let's get into it.
Let's look at my timeline. I feel very vulnerable doing this, you guys. I'm just going to say, like, this is woof. Okay, so if you have access to the program, this is one of the first things that you will get, which is our canvas that keeps track of all of the things that you do throughout all 6 of the growth paths. So we're making sense of Abby Covert on this particular one. So we're going to zoom on in to the timeline exercise. And without getting, too much into the weeds of my particular timeline, you can see that, as I mentioned, I've organized mine by location. We also have our years going down here. And then we have our major and minor plot points. So things like I moved to a small Caribbean island when I was 7 years old. It's kind of a huge part of my background and my history. It's also one of those like fun facts that people often do not know about me. So it adds a lot of context when you start a story there. It also has more minor plot points. And it has kind of projects of note that I did. You'll see that as I get older and more involved in things, they start to stack up. And this probably is indicating there to be a crash at some point. So I think that this visual in particular is pretty important to pay attention to. Because I'm kind of like, where are we going from here? Does this level out at some point? So yeah, I think that this is a to be watched type of a thing. Yeah. Any questions for me as my peer on my timeline, Alfie?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I would ask, given the fact that you're breaking it up by location, so removing the location where you live right now, which would you say has been the most impactful period in sort of like the person that you've developed into? And I ask that question specifically from the perspective of like how you think about where you want to build your life. Like, has there been a place where you're like, oh, here I learned something that I don't want to ever repeat again, or everywhere I live from now on needs to have this?
Yes, it's a very simple answer. Ready? Okay, here we go. Caribbean island, right? Warm, tropical. Boston, no longer warm, no longer tropical, very uncomfortable. New Hampshire, colder, more uncomfortable. Chicago, cold, but add wind and very tall buildings. And then New York City, we still are cold, but now it's like dirty and cold. And then finally Florida. So I'm gaining on almost a decade here in Florida, which seems crazy to say now, because when we moved here, I could never have imagined that I would make a community in a small suburban town. But it has happened. Like, committing this time in this location, like, I would honestly say this location is the one that impacted me the most. So I know that you've excluded it from being able to be one of my answers. So I won't. But I do want to point that out, that like, you are right in assuming that this has been the most impactful location of my life. I would say it's honestly, I'm teetering between St. Croix and New York City for very similar reasons. I feel like in St. Croix, I was homeschooled for the majority of high school. And I was very...
sorry, do you mind just pointing out where in the timeline that is?
Oh, yeah. That's right here. Up here. Yeah. So, I wrote in this box, I'm a self-starter, an artist, a budding designer, an actress. I was an opera-trained singer at that point in my life, which was kind of crazy. Like, I flew to other Caribbean islands doing opera competitions. And I also became a stage manager at that point for theatrical productions, because even though I was in high school, I was homeschooled, so I wasn't part of like, the high school theater thing. So I got really involved in community theater. And so a lot of like my community kind of commitment and like how much that runs through me comes from way back then. I did like a ton of volunteer service as a point of like my time as a homeschooler. I was part of a program that required like a certain number of hours for that. And it was like hundreds of hours every year to different charities and organizations around in the island. So that one definitely, I feel like, is a very impactful time. And then the other one is New York City, which is sort of like, I mean, look at this. I was just like, hi, am I unhappy in my work? Boom, ba-doom, ba-doom, ba-doom. I'm just moving and moving and moving, like cities, jobs. And I'm also moving up the ladder. I'm a junior, I'm a mid, I'm a senior. Now I'm a director. Like, what is happening? And then when I moved to New York City, I went independent. I went back to being a creator. I had started my blog. I had started doing public speaking, and I had decided that I wanted to write a book. And I was just like, you know what? I'm not gonna do this job hopping thing anymore. And so, yeah, I stuck with my independence all the way through New York City. And so it does kind of have like an interesting like coming back around. It also happens to be the time of my Saturn return. So I think that there's a very impactful, like where you turn 30 is a pretty big deal. And so, yeah, New York City. I also met my husband there. I got married there. Like that was a very pivotal time. So yeah, I can't pick one. It's one of those.
No, fair enough. I think those are strong candidates. Maybe a sort of second point to ask, and this question might sort of miss the mark a bit given the fact that you've done your timeline a couple of times. But is there a time period which you find hardest to recall, or maybe most challenging to sort of like describe to another person? And not necessarily because it was difficult. Sometimes that's the case, but sometimes it kind of just is like that time in your memory is fuzzy, or at least I find that. Like I've got specific periods in my mind that are fuzzy, and it's not necessarily always based on like because it was long ago. Sometimes it kind of just feels like it was an eventful time.
Yeah. I feel like I have an aspect of blur that happened in college. Like I definitely remember college in bursts, and I have a lot of really like rich feelings about what I learned there and about the people that I was with, but it gets real hazy after that, which, you know, that just could be like I moved to a city from a Caribbean island when I was 17 years old, and I burned it at both ends for a real long time. So it could just be that. But yeah, it's that part is hard for me to like. I also found myself like as a creator and a designer at that point, and that's hard to imagine a before of, if that makes any sense. It's hard to remember who I was when I walked onto that campus the first time, because I was so different when I walked off of that campus. But as we've already discussed, I don't consider it to be like the most impactful time of my life. Like it was just kind of this little slice, but it also turned into this massive permission slip, because art school is so hard to like get through because you have to have such a thick skin. And I excelled in that environment. And I feel like because of that, I was able to sort of like launch off of that. So yeah, I think it's hard for me to remember what it was like to be that person, as opposed to all of the other blocks on this map. I'm kind of like, yeah, I remember being her. Definitely remember being her. And that in between part of I think it's very much the cocoon, if that makes any sense. It feels very like I was squashed in a bunch of silk. You know, I'm just like in more, I'm just chilling, hanging out, waiting to emerge as whatever I'm going to be. And then like everything after there was just like chaos, like discovering a career and then like blowing through it, just being like, I am just bearing down and blowing through this until burning out. And so, yeah, that like chasm here is really interesting too.
So the question I would ask, and it's kind of like, I'm more curious about how you think about it, because I think because of the way I think about it, but which part of the timeline do you use to introduce yourself? Like when you meet a new person, is there a time period which which is like your go-to? And like beyond just the hi, how are you? Like when you want a person to know a little bit more about you, like what time period do you lean on?
It's interesting because, so as a person who moved to a small town, I would say that having moved from New York City was my like introduction for a couple years here, because it was sort of like, oh, hi, I'm Abby. I'm new. I moved here from New York City. Like that's the best thing I can tell you about positioning me in the universe for you. And details of my life, like where I grew up or any of that, were more like surprise bombs along the way of like, whoa, I didn't know that about you, after people know me. So yeah, I think that's probably the most recent one, but I would not say that now. So I'm trying to think like, how do I describe myself now? It really depends on the context. Like if it's with a person locally, I go with author the most often. That's the easiest for like people to grasp what I actually do with my time. I write books. And so I think like, yeah, writing 2 books is kind of a go-to of like, oh, what do you do? Oh, I write books. And they're like, oh, what kind of books? And then I say information architecture. And then it's basically like a choose your own adventure of how curious this person right now, because that is a real self-selector. Like people are like, you're shut down. Like they want you to say romance so badly. And I'm not saying romance. And so they're disappointed. But yeah, when you find somebody who reacts really positively to it, oftentimes they become a lifelong friend. So it's worth saying. But yeah, it's my road into information architecture these days. Whereas like when I was a consultant and I lived in New York City, I introduced myself as an information architect boldly every place that I went immediately. I was very like job title first type of person. And I guess I still am, with author being my go-to. So I don't know, maybe I'd be like in a lot of cases locally now, maybe I'm just homeschooling now. Like that's how I've been meeting people most recently, is I'm homeschooling my son. So it's a big fact about me, I guess. How about you, listener? I'm wondering, like, with our listeners here, like, yeah, what do you all go to? What's your go-to period of life that you start with when you talk about yourself? Like, can you tell your life story? I couldn't before I had a picture of it, for sure. It got very scattery, and you skip a lot of details. So yeah, definitely an exercise worth doing. Also, just to give you a little preview, what we've set up here is the introspection part is you doing your timeline, but then the peership integration is 4 weeks of suggested conversation topics that you use to slowly warm up to sharing the kinds of details that are in a timeline. We also do not require that you ever show your timeline to your partners. So it can just be a fully verbalized exercise without the visual aid. All right, Alfie, shall we move on to our next one?
Let's do it.
Next one, external perspectives. I am not going to zoom in on this one.
That's fair.
I'm going to stop my sharing of my screen for this one. But the sharing of external perspectives is probably the most, I mean, you tell me if you disagree, Alfie. It's probably the most feared of the assignments that we've given to our students. The assignment is that you invite a few people in your personal life to have a discussion about how they see you, about how they've interacted with you in the past, about how they've seen you show up. This can be personal connections. This can be professional connections. This can be people you know really well. This can be people that you don't know very well. And so there's a lot of different angles that you can take with this exercise. I particularly decided to take this exercise as a way to re-engage with some of my most inner circle people to see how they think of me now, as opposed to like most of these people on this list. I think everyone on this list has known me more than 10 years. So it's kind of like, you've seen me through a lot of transitions. Like, how do you perceive what's happening right now? And also to get some feedback on things that I'm thinking about and directions that I might go in. So, the first person on my list is a mentor of mine for probably about 15 years. And let's see, I'm going to zoom in so I can read what I wanted to talk to him about. I wrote, he holds the most and full picture of the last 15 years of my life, both personally and professionally. And I really want to reflect on that 15 years. Like, I really want to talk about how I've changed. Like, he's known me through a big transition of becoming a professional. Like, when I met him, I had 5 years of experience, and that's, a baby middle. And so, yeah, I feel like he's really been there for the ups and the downs, and I want to have like a more full rounded conversation about that. The first round that I did of these, I used them a little bit differently. The first time that we did this, I used it to reach out to people that were like doing things that were similar to what I wanted to be doing, and folks that I wanted to be more like. And so that was a really interesting kind of contrast to this time around. Spoiler alert, Alfie, I'm planning on doing these interviews again because I haven't done them yet, but I did plan them for this round, and I'm like, I think I should go forward with it. So I'll report back on a future pod. The next one is my oldest coworker. Like, this person was in the cubicle next to me at my first job. So that means they know who they are, and they might be listening to this podcast. Hello. I met this person when I was 21 years old. And even at that age, this person saw me and treated me like a peer. And that was like so needed in my life right then. And we haven't stayed incredibly close, but we've stayed close enough that he's a constant part of kind of how I think about my origin story and who I became. So yeah, I really want to talk about like that origin, like to get a little bit of external perspective on how I got my start, because he was there. He was in the cubicle right next to her. So we've never really talked about that before. The next person is like my ride or die, my BFF, my person. And this is about accountability and patterns. Like, I know that they have a lot to say about patterns, and so I'm going to give them the invitation to do the saying, which this podcast might be the way that they find out. No, I've already sent the invitations. This has already happened. And then the last one is, I have this person that I used to work with, and they're like my house on fire person. Like, I connect with them every 6 or so months because we're both incredibly busy. But when we connect, it's for over an hour, and it's like, no, you hang up. No, you hang up. No, you hang up. Because it's just like we have so much to talk about. And that person, I specifically said, I want to talk to them about loving what we do and not wanting to do it forever. Yeah, I have some deep budding thoughts about like, how do you prepare yourself for after this? So yeah, those are my people. And so yeah, my plan is I'm going to be interviewing them. And then I'll report back how this round goes. In the first round, I would say that the answers to some of those interview questions were the reason that I felt brave enough to pursue the Sensemakers Club as a discussion club. Like, I reached out specifically to people that were kind of in that space of membership and reaching, having more of a touch with their audience. And that was really inspiring. It was sort of like I could do that. I can do that. So I think that this was a really impactful exercise. But do you have any reflection back from teaching this module on how hard it was to get people to do it?
Yeah. And even just mentally revisiting it, like one of the things that's the hardest about it, because the thing is, I find the activity is harder the closer the person is to you.
Yes. The one I'm scared of is my BFF. I'm like, I don't know if I want to hear the hearing, but
exactly. And like there are two parts to it, because it's like, on the one hand, you can tell yourself, I know this person, I know what they're gonna say, and we've been through this so many times, like, is it even worth it?
Yeah.
And more often than not, that's kind of like hiding a more scary truth, which is like, I'm scared they're gonna say this, and once they say it, it's out there, and they're just not taking it back.
Yes, it can't be unsaid. That's so true.
So that, I'd say that's kind of like one of the things that's really challenging about this. But then at the same time, the other aspect that's quite challenging about it is kind of like, even just asking yourself the question, who can I talk to? Like filling in the bingo card.
Oh yeah, the bingo card.
Already
so hard.
Provides you with such like a fresh and sometimes sinus clearing perspective on exactly where you are with a lot of your relationships. And some of the questions which you don't get to think about on a day-to-day basis, but which require answering, you know? So I think, like, at least in terms of the challenging nature of this activity, I think it definitely ranks close to the top. But I would also say, from the benefit perspective, it also ranks close to the top, especially because it is easy to go years, decades, maybe even an entire life without getting some of those questions answered if you don't do it intentionally. Because it's so easy to kind of like go about your day-to-day schedule and kind of like, you know, have the discussions necessary at work, come home, have the logistical questions with the people in the home environment, and never really get to the questions which don't have to be answered, but could easily add a lot of color and richness to your life if they are answered.
Yeah, totally. I feel like there's something to be said of like, when you are vulnerable like that with a friend, it brings you to a different level of friendship. Like, I feel like there was actually two of the people that I interviewed my first round doing this, like almost 2 years ago when we first started testing these things, two of those people ended up like regular calendar contacts for me. Like I have regular every 2 or 3 months. We just agreed like, hey, let's put something on the calendar because it felt like, oh, it had been too long. And we are enough of an importance in each other's lives that we should make more time. Or we can learn a lot from each other. That was definitely one of them. It was like, oh man, we should really be comparing notes more often because yeah, there's a lot there. So, okay. Well, yeah, do we want to talk about the bingo card? I kind of want to read a couple of the prompts off of the bingo card.
Yeah, I think that would be useful.
Yeah. So the start of this exercise is a bingo card of 25 prompts where you put in the names of the people that come to mind when you answer this question. So a person who has plenty of experience in a specific domain I'd like to explore. Someone that I admire from a different generation than myself. A connection who has called attention to my contribution or influence on a past project. A person who has a good coaching sense. A person who you wish you had stayed in closer contact with. A person who you would love the excuse to reach back out to. Or one of my favorites is a person who you wish you could tell the latest update on your story to. That person was like an automatic. I'm definitely going to be reaching out to them in both rounds for me. It's like why am I not?
Yeah. The bingo card's good.
Did somebody come to mind for you for that last one?
Well, I was thinking about it and not immediately because I was kind of like thinking about it and nothing immediately came to mind. And then I was like, what would be the thing I would want to talk about so that it can help me figure out who the person is? And I would say the thing that I would want to probably talk about, well, there are two things. So the one is a little bit of writing that I've been doing about speaking and communication. Like there are a couple of people who I've kind of explored the public speaking environment with through the years at different points in my life. And so I'd obviously like to get their perspective just on the thoughts and so on, because I also think it's something that like isn't necessarily appreciated by the everyday person, given how much people are afraid of public speaking. It's kind of difficult to get into that sort of like granular technical detail. And so, but that I'd say that part of me is maybe a little bit more curious than like really meaningful. But then I think the other one, which has been super cool and one of the latest thought projects, I guess, because it hasn't really taken any sort of solid form yet. But I've been thinking a lot more about family dynamics, and in the first iteration of this program, I think I was at the beginning of this journey, but I've been thinking a lot more about family dynamics and like engagements and the challenges that we face out completely separated from the professional environment. And yeah, it's capturing my attention and mind more often and in much greater depth. And there was a time, it was I think the mid to early years of my college experience, where we used to host a sort of like a what is the best way to put it? Discussion circle, maybe, is the best thing to say for like people in the college sort of phase of life. And so it was kind of like young adults, and we'd kind of have like a case study about a person's life who's going through a specific like crisis, and then we'd talk about it as if we were advising this person. And it was super cool. Like I really enjoyed it, and we had people from all different backgrounds, different stages of their lives, different contexts and environments. And it was like from a group of like 6 to 7 people. Sometimes we had like 15, 16 people. And so it's sort of like bringing that back, but specifically with focus on family. And I'm really liking the direction that it's starting to take my mind. Yeah. So,
and I'm like, so for this podcast, we go behind the scenes for behind the scenes, but for this podcast, Alfie and I decided to revisit these exercises, like 1 year later since the last time that we fully did these. And I'm now going to go ahead and say you should go back and do the bingo card again, Alfie.
Yes.
I think it is time. It is time. I felt honestly because I redid it for this, and I was really glad that I did because I wasn't planning on necessarily like going forward and doing the interviews and everything, just kind of like using it as an example. But I honestly, once I planned it all, I was like, no, I really want to have these conversations. So, like I said, I already sent out invitations, so we'll see. Shall we move on to the next one because it's the doozy. We have the doozy to end on. This one is developing a personal decision-making guide. So this module is all about your aspirations. It's about defining what you aspire to and then figuring out the motivation and the impact of those aspirations, and then ultimately exploring how to balance them. So I think this will be a good one to just kind of like walk through step by step. And Alfie, this is all new to you because I've redone this. We talked about whether or not we just kind of like copy paste, but I really wanted to revisit it because like I do feel like my aspirations have shifted, with like deciding to homeschool my kid. Like a lot of my priorities have started to shift around things. So I feel like there's a reason for me to revisit it, which I have had my original ones of these stuck to my desk for the last year. So it's a big deal that I'm changing it. But so it starts with step 1, which we ask you 5 questions. And the questions are about kind of what words or phrases do you aspire to see in yourself or in how you relate to other people, or when you're making a decision, or when things are going right, or when things are going very wrong. And then from there, we grab the sort of one that impacts us the most or feels like the most resonant, and we move those down into step 2. So for mine, in terms of words and phrases that I aspire to see in myself, I wrote kindness, bravery, clarity, and generous. And I think generous is probably the new one from this time, although I did not compare notes, so I don't actually know. For some of the words and how you relate to others, I wrote authenticity and community oriented. For how I'm making decisions, I wrote thoughtful, balanced, thorough, and adventurous, which surprised even me. And then when you aspire to, when things are going right, playful and innovative were the 2 that came up for me. And then what are some words or phrases that you aspire to when things are going wrong? I had strong, stable, wise, and steady, which is much different than the last time that we went through. So then I went into motivations. So brave, I aspire to be brave because there are many battles left to fight. And this most impacts my confidence in my output. Like I think that me believing in me is the bravest thing that I can do at this point. And so, yeah, I've kind of reframed the idea of bravery to be about confidence in me as opposed to like being able to achieve a thing. It's like, just like whatever it is, I'll figure it out. And there's lots left. So, for most aspire to be in my relationships is authentic because I believe I am the best me when I am being me. And I think that this most impacts who I'm able to spend my time with and still feel good and energetic. And that's definitely been something that has come into question in the last year or so of like who I spend my time with and how I spend my time is very impactful, obviously, but specifically it's impactful on my authenticity. In terms of making decisions, I most aspire to be thoughtful because there's a ton of nuance and no answer is ever the only right one. And I think that this the most impacts what I do with my time and my energy and my money. So I feel like this one, when I think about how I answered this question before, it was with kindness. So I think thoughtful is a very different place to be coming to from going from kindness. And then when things go right, I most aspire to be playful because things don't have to be so serious if everything is good. And this most impacts my relationship with myself and with my kid. And then when things go wrong, I most aspire to be steady because being erratic doesn't help and does in fact hurt those around me and me. And this most impacts my relationship with myself and with my kid. And then step 3 is we move the the aspiration to the center of these balancing continuums, and we look at what it looks like to over and undervalue versus remain in balance with that thing. So for bravery, achieving balance looks like feeling scared but prepared is how I'm thinking about it. And then knowing that the hard way is the better way, and just kind of like keeping that focus. Overvaluing that looks like arrogance. It looks like making leaps without thought. It looks like boasting about one's bravery. And then on the undervaluing side, it can be timid. So feeling scared and overwhelmed, going with what is easy over the next right thing. And I definitely, in just making this continuum, shook myself out of a little timid moment that I was having. So good job, me. Good job. The next one is authentic. So this one, the balance looks like feeling proud of myself for telling my truth and not hiding from my past or my future. But there's an overvaluing that looks like oversharing, telling secrets, betraying trust, trusting people too early, or nervous chatter. And then we get into crafted, which is on the undervaluing side. And this is sort of like the doing it for the plot, the spinning it to make it a better story, removing details when things get hard, that kind of thing. We have thoughtful. So for this one, the balance for me looked like taking time to consider more angles and also writing down my thoughts. I think that like that's one of the things that I've really centered myself on, is that writing things down really helps me to process them. And so even if I'm like talking about it, it's not until I actually write it down. So that's part of being thoughtful for me. But undervaluing that can be feeling very impulsive, like taking steps without care, stepping on people's toes to move fast. And then overvaluing being thoughtful can look like obsessing. So spinning around on a simple task, avoidance, procrastination, that kind of thing. We have playful. So for this one, I'm thinking that balance looks like holding things lightly and being able to laugh in the face of pain. But overvaluing that can be silly. So that's minimizing my pain, that's self-deprecating, that's never minding through a hard thing. And then undervaluing looks like gripping outcomes too tightly or overwhelming my network. And then the last one, steady. So achieving balance looks like taking time to react, breathing. Apparently that's important. Did you know that? Breathing? Yeah. And then holding boundaries firmly. But the overvaluing of that looks like rigidity. It's refusing to change. It's not exploring all the options. It's not seeking counsel from people because I already know better. And then the other side of that, the undervaluing, is shaky. So making split-second decisions, forgetting to breathe, letting people in closer than is healthy for me. So that was, I really enjoyed revisiting these. I felt like I didn't know that I needed to reset my aspirations and my decisions, but I feel like enough has changed in my life that it made sense to revisit these a year later. Yeah. In listening to this, does it make you feel like you're going to be revisiting this as well as your bingo card? Or?
I think so, but I think the part that I think needs revisiting is step 2 more than the continuums.
Oh, interesting. So you're thinking about the impact and motivation more than the decision making.
Yes, because I think that has somewhat changed a little bit. Because I think I've also managed, though not in the way I thought I would, I've managed to achieve a lot of the things that I wanted to achieve when I was kind of coming into this process. And so it's sort of like I need to move the mark in a way that's going to keep me growing. And it's not absolutely clear where the mark is going to land. And so I think in sort of like writing out these aspiration, motivation, impact trios, it'll kind of help me think through some things that are a little bit fuzzy at the moment.
Yeah. Oh, I totally think that that's true. Because if I think about it, my step 1, I would almost guarantee that there's very little change here if I was to compare a year ago to this one. I think that my answers are fairly similar. It was down here that things changed. It was in the motivation and the impact that things changed for me, as opposed to like over here. This all ended up being brand new because all of this ended up being brand new. But yeah, it was interesting to revisit. Sure.
Yeah.
And then same as the other path, we have the peer integration. And I think the peer integration on this is particularly good. Like, we don't try to get you to do this fast. And I think that that's a really important part of this exercise, because like we just went through that very quickly, but there's a lot of thought work that goes into coming up with something that's that crystallized. So like in the peership integration part, we really start with just those first 2 steps, and we discuss those with peers before we even get into the continuums, which I think is a really generous way to kind of break it up, because the continuums can be a little intimidating to try to fill them up quickly. You know, I think like a partner can be really helpful for that.
Yeah, I think this one is a strong activity, and I would say it probably has the most ongoing utility. I think a lot of the other activities are useful, but you kind of like, they're useful to do and you derive the value from them, and then it's kind of like you move on with a healthier version of your life. This one has the most like reusability potential, because every time something hectic and difficult comes up, you can revisit it and gain a lot of value out of it.
This is my thing that stuck to my computer, and I have to update it now because of this exercise. And so this has been stuck to my computer for a year, and I use it almost every single day. I look at it when I have to make major decisions. I use it to make minor decisions sometimes. I'm just like, where am I right now on this? If I'm feeling weird or scared or things are hard or, you know, confusing or whatever, I do find it to be a very grounding exercise. So.
And I'd say particularly if you struggle with like indecisiveness or with kind of like letting go of things.
Yeah, it turns out that like we
aspire
to things and then have it completely different than how we actually make decisions. It's like, do you remember right after we like finalized our continuums the last time, and then I had that decision to make about taking a speaking engagement, and we used the continuums to talk through it, and I got mad because I felt like my continuums were victimizing me. I was like, wait, but yeah, it was a really important
Past Abby was
for
not
me to
allowing
say.
it.
Yeah, past Abby was being like, that is not what you said you wanted to do. And she was right. When I look back on that, that was the correct answer. That was the correct answer for my life right then. So yeah, I do believe that this is an impactful exercise. So, cool. Well, as we close this very special episode, I'm going to turn it around. Usually, Alfie, you ask me how made sense of am I this month, but I'm going to ask you, how made sense are you feeling, Mr. Alfie Allo?
I was clearly not at all ready to answer that question.
A very special episode in which we have very little script.
I would say that I feel like I'm in a micro transition in the middle of a macro transition, which is not that fun of a place to be, but useful. Yeah, like I kind of went into a very intense kind of like work period over the last 4 months. And it is proving harder than I thought to find a place of equilibrium again. And that is happening in a broader sort of transition from self-employed, completely on my own path to sort of like stepping out of that again. And so that transition feels like it's going well. But the sort of like tactical navigation is a little bit difficult, or is proving more difficult than I expected. I thought it would be the big transition that would be hard, but I actually feel like I was ready and it was time. But navigating it from a tactical perspective is proving slightly more complicated than I expected. Yeah, that's how made sense of I am. Time to turn the the spotlight back over to you. How made sense of are you?
I feel fairly made sense of this month, which might be surprising given that everything in my life seems to be changing very rapidly. So we unexpectedly started homeschooling our kindergartner this last month. I think I've dropped a hint on that a couple times in this episode. And that has really changed a lot about my everyday life and how I'm spending my time and the division of my time. I think I was saying to you a couple days ago that like, I feel like overwork is creeping back, but it's not. It's just that I'm working at times of the day that I generally associate with working too much, like early in the morning, in the evening, like after my kid goes to bed, those kinds of things. And so I'm starting to have to readjust some of the ways that I think about those rhythms in my life. Also, my entire life is now broken into 2-hour chunks because my husband and I are just like kind of having like a handoff schedule while both of us try to maintain our small businesses and homeschool a kindergartner. And so, yeah, I think it feels like everything fits into little boxes right now, which feels very made sense of. I don't know that is going to last for very long. Like, I feel like we kind of have like a newness novelty that makes my ADHD brain very happy. So yeah, I'll be really interested to see like what happens longer term. Also, I'm really hopeful that we'll get a better handle on like services and support that we can get and that kind of thing. So, yeah, I would say that that's like the predominant thing that I'm making sense of these days is trying to figure out what my life looks like as a homeschool family. Yeah.
Well, good luck. And no effort is wasted.
Yeah. No, it feels it's at least something that's worth putting my effort into. I know that for sure. So that feels good about it.
And it is, I have to say, as an observer on this side of the making sense, it is good to hear a update that has got nothing to do with the train station.
Oh my God. Yeah, no, I mean, I should tell them though, like you did ask me about the train station about a month ago. And like I told you that I'm not there anymore. I'm not at the train station. I'm not there. So yeah, I don't feel like I'm careening for burnout. I feel like I'm trying to figure out what model is next that's going to allow all to work. But I see a way. Like I don't see a way that looks like a lot of other people's way, but I do see a way. So yeah, it feels hopeful for Nick. maybe by the time we record your half of this episode, it'll be different. Spoiler alert, that's in like 3 days.
Now is all we have.
Thanks for tuning in to this special 2-part episode. Making Sense of Yourself is now available and is rolling admissions with 2 meetings a month, one to check in with us and one to get paired with a peer. We'd love to see you at a future match. And if you're interested in the program, visit thesensemakersclub.com and look for Making Sense of Yourself in our course catalog. As for the podcast, if you appreciate what we're doing, we would love to hear from you. Also, the usual things do help. Liking, subscribing, and especially leaving a review really do help us get this podcast out to new listeners. Okay, until next time, be clear.